I'm just delighted to be here and to be invited onto this stage for the next two sessions to speak to some real, genuine, grounded experts. It's also a delight to be back in Manila for the first time in 4 years, despite being only 2 hours flight away. I'm additionally delighted to see so many people here. Hopefully we'll be able to give you some information, maybe a bit of entertainment as well. It's quite appropriate given that we have this kind of, talk show set up, as you said yesterday, Ben, and my fantasies of being a talk show host start and end today. Today we're talking about emerging opportunities in Indochina. Our two august guests are Daniel Lee, who is the COO of Las Vegas Sun in Bavette and an ex-VP at Nagacorp, and Ben Lee, managing partner of iGamix. Daniel, would you just like to do a very quick introduction of yourself, please?
Thanks, Martin. It's great to be here in Manila, and we're very happy to be on board on this panel. I've been in Cambodia for the last 15 years. I started off with Nagacorp, did some consulting after that for Melco through their subsidiary in Cambodia, and I'm now with a group that has been actively investing into the border areas of Cambodia and Vietnam. So Las Vegas Sun is a project that was acquired recently. Las Vegas Sun was a casino that has been in Bavette since 2007, and we've just purchased it and we have rebuilt it again and marketing it again. So happy to be on board.
Terrific, thanks. Ben, quick self-introduction, please.
Okay, very quickly. My company, iGamix, started in 2008. We are the source of the Macau weekly GGR data that comes out every Monday, as well as the Manila gaming data. So we're the only independent private source, as well as that we do a lot of project studies all around Southeast Asia, primarily, as well as get involved in new gaming projects from the macro area programming through to startup and launch.
Terrific, thanks Ben. Now our subject matter today is Indochina. It's a strange, somewhat dated term for a region of Southeast Asia that's increasingly important along many metrics. We're going to touch on all 5 of the countries in Indochina today, obviously at different levels of detail. I'd like to start with Cambodia, partly because Daniel, you're obviously based in Cambodia and an expert on Cambodia, but also because it's been a very, very volatile place in terms of the development of the gambling industry, both the land-based and the now illegal online industry. Daniel, just give us a general impression, please, of what the state of gaming regulation is in Cambodia and how it's affecting the market.
So I think we had AGB in Cambodia in 2019. I was on the panel there as well. At that time, it was legal to have online casinos, but at the end towards the end of 2019, the government decided to pull the plug on online gaming. Now, also in 2022, they announced the introduction of the new gaming legislation, where it used to be a fixed tax regime, has now been regulated and pretty much following the likes of Singapore and other developed gaming jurisdictions. In terms of the cityscape, in terms of the gaming environment, well, of course, Nagacorp has the exclusive for Phnom Penh till 2065, and I think you've probably read that they're having Naga 3 coming online soon. And in terms of the border casinos, surprisingly, the data that I got from the Commercial Gaming Management Commission in Cambodia, there are 91 casinos that have been approved for operation, and 87 are in the pipeline for approval. And there are 2 new applications. For the new applications, they do need to show 100 million investment for a standalone casino and 200 million for an IR. Now, with the tax regime in Cambodia, we're looking at a 4% for IRs and 7% for just a regular casino base.
But it's you mentioned to me the other day that earlier this year, in January, I believe, there were additional tax changes that were made. Could you perhaps just explain what's going on there?
Well, it came as a surprise to many casino operators, and we're looking at 187 potential licensees, and they announced recently that they will add a 10% VAT and a 1% turnover tax on top of the 7%. There was obviously a lot of resistance from casino operators and owners, licensees, to the point that they have not actually confirmed the implementation of the 1% and 10% VAT. So at this stage, it's still a bit up in the air. One thing good about Cambodia in terms of the opportunities that exist is that the government does, from time to time, take a step back and look at the policies that they've announced that they will introduce, reevaluate it, and make appropriate changes to it. So we are hopeful that this would be, I guess, studied again and hopefully not implemented.
Okay. Sihanoukville, I suppose you could divide the Cambodian land-based market into three sectors. You've got Naga World dominating the capital and the surrounds. You've got Sihanoukville, which was dominant at one point in terms of new growth and investment in the merger of land-based and online gambling. And then you've got the border casinos, all up and down the borders with largely Vietnam and Thailand. Sihanoukville is a place, those of you who've been there, I'm sure you'll agree, it's a fairly unforgettable place for different reasons. What do you see as the future for Sihanoukville, given that the online ban ripped the guts out of much of its, shall we say, splendor, and has now, it appears, morphed into a mixture of online gambling and illegal operations involving scam work and the kidnapping and enslavement of foreign workers?
Yeah, so with Sihanoukville, I think one thing that the government and the country could benefit from was the rapid development of Sihanoukville. So a lot of infrastructure investment went in the last 4 or 5 years, and we saw the entire city transform into probably a province of China. There was rapid growth, rapid development, very good infrastructure was put in place. But of course, there was then the downside to it. So during COVID, there was a lot more activities online. And unfortunately, we had cases where operators were running scam operations through Sihanoukville. And they were doing a lot of human trafficking, they were imprisoning people. And the government has been very responsive in cleaning it up. So over the last 9 months, they've literally gone in and raided a lot of places and also have been able to stamp out most of these activities.
Most of them, although they're just I think yesterday or the other day, there were 2 more suicides by foreign nationals jumping off buildings in Sihanoukville. Clearly the problem still exists. When do we think this problem can be dealt with?
Well, I think it's probably impossible to eradicate it completely. They put in a lot of checks and balances in terms of both the local government, the national committee against human trafficking, as well as the Ministry of Interior, the police. We will still probably have pockets operating, but again, it's not going to be as easy as it used to be. As to the future of Sihanoukville, obviously it's a key port for Cambodia. There's a lot of interest from Chinese investors for development in terms of trade, as a port is the largest port that we have. There's also a lot of interest in terms of setting up a Shenzhen-like tech park. So these were all things that was put on the table. There is an airport there, and there's a lot of development still going on there. One project that I should mention is called the Bay of Lights. And it's a reclaimed land just behind the airport called Ream. And they have invested in reclaiming about 1,000 hectares of land. And they intend to build a financial hub there and basically to support the financial hub as well, a lot of infrastructure.
Can I just add something?
Go ahead.
I add a couple of things that's noteworthy that Daniel cannot talk about because he lives there. So, you know, as we all know, Sihanoukville grew up very, very quickly as an online Wild Wild West cowboy town, and then China got a bit upset by the online gaming industry, and Hun Sen announced the shutdown of the online. But during COVID, basically the local tycoons cried poor because the online industry died. But during COVID, it gradually came back up again, and we've done a couple of feasibility studies there, one before COVID, one during COVID. And I would say that the online industry is quarter now, it's below the radar, but it's probably around about 50% of what it was during the peak, which is still pretty darn good. And you know, some of this new pending project that Daniel talked about, obviously it's not a destination for actual gamblers. I know there are feasibility studies there that say it's a beach destination for the Thais. God help me, I cannot fathom it being a destination for Thais who have their own beaches. Really, with what they have in that city, it was basically the submarine cables that came in that facilitated online. That's the primary driver. So Sihanoukville will always be an online, and as to how much it will grow really depends on how much China is allowed to let it grow.
Yes, well, we'll return to the issue of Chinese influence and interest in Cambodia in a moment. I just want to take a point that Daniel made about the condition for ongoing licensing involving investment to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. We've got all of these existing border casinos in place, more on the way. To what extent is it true, Ben, that we're going to see that level of investment by these licensees? But more to the point, in relation to today's topic, are there actually any opportunities for investment here? Or what are we talking about? Are we talking about a fixed game in terms of who the investors are? And if there are genuine opportunities of investment, are they going to be predominantly Chinese investors?
Sorry, is that for me or
Yes,
Ben?
that's for you, Ben.
Oh, okay. So Cambodia consisted of two major markets. Sorry, let me rephrase that, three. So basically, the local market is the main one. The local market exists primarily in Phnom Penh. Although Naga has a foreigners only license, but anyone who walks in there will see immediately that the business, 80% of the business is accounted for by the locals. Not just the mass grind, but the local opnias, the tycoons, the lords and tanstries or datos or whatever the equivalent is. And then you've got the ones arraigned on the border with Thailand. So Thailand is a major market. So, you know, if you ever talk about Thai casinos coming online, obviously they will impact those casinos there, most of which, by the way, are owned by major stakeholders in Thailand. And then you've got the ones arraigned on the border with Vietnam, Bavet, and there was the other one further down, Ha Tien. And then there was another further down. So really you've got these three major markets. It really depends on where your connections are, where you're able to draw your customers. So obviously if you have connections in Thailand, you can bring Thai customers out. It's got to be along the Thai border. If you're Vietnamese on, then it's got to be along the border with Vietnam. If you're in Sihanoukville, you attract nobody but the online operators because of the submarine cable and at one stage relatively low cost and then relatively free immigration arrival and constraints. But that one's going to be subject to push-pull China soft power diplomacy with Cambodia.
Okay, Daniel, what are your comments on that?
Well, I think Ben is absolutely right. I mean, the borders thrive only because there aren't legal casinos in Vietnam and in, well, there are in Vietnam, but for locals, for Vietnamese locals, they have to go overseas to gamble. Now, in Thailand, we do know that there are underground casinos, but the borders do thrive because of the non-gaming license at the moment. When Thailand has a gaming license, I would expect the border casinos along the Thai border to be hugely impacted by this. Now, what Ben talked about, Sihanoukville, we now have a superhighway linking Phnom Penh to Sihanoukville, which will take you about an hour and a half. In the past, it will take you 5 hours to get there. So this will also encourage domestic tourism. Ben spoke about locals gambling. Of course, Naga's point would be that they have dual passports. But again, you know, the laws are in place, but the enforcement is something else that is, you know, beyond our control. So coming back to the point about Sihanouk's feasibility in terms of where it will go in terms of gaming, a lot has been invested in Sihanoukville, and we will probably see some tourism going to the beaches, maybe mostly from tour groups from China. What Ben said is true. I mean, there are definitely better beaches in Thailand, so we won't be expecting many Thai visitors to Sihanoukville.
Well, before we wander across the border to Thailand, I have to take this opportunity to quickly talk about Naga World in the capital. Now, you're a former executive with Naga Corp, the owner, and it at one point, according to our data at our company from quite a few years ago, it was one of the top 10 most lucrative casinos in the world. Of late, obviously with COVID, but also perhaps because of other reasons, the numbers have pulled back a little, and its potential earning power through the opening of stage 3 may have been, the outlook may not be as rosy as it appears to be when those announcements first came out. And that's just a story that's repeated itself across the industry, of course. I was wondering if you could just quickly comment on a few issues involving Naga World, such as the fate of stage 3, the labour issues involving a year-long protests of sacked workers that has earned angry responses from international labour groups, and finally, where on earth is the CEO?
Well, okay, so we'll start with the easy one first. Naga does rely quite a bit on junkets, and you know, as we talked in the previous panel about the censorship of junkets in various jurisdictions, it has also impacted Naga's flow of funds through the junket operations. So this has impacted Naga in terms of being able to provide for the Chinese players a means to gamble. Now, in terms of the labor protests, yes, it's ongoing. Is it illegal? I think it's been hyped up, to be honest. If the protesters did it in I guess in a more legal way, they still probably wouldn't have a leg to stand on when you go up against a company like Naga. So they have resorted to illegal protests, and that's why we have a lot of the union leaders who have been arrested as well. So what we can take back from this is that, you know, there are labor laws in place. Of course, the police are enforcing incitement. This has been quite a term used in arresting the protesters. But I really don't see them having much of a future. It's pretty much hitting themselves against a brick wall. As to Tan Sri, the chairman and CEO, yeah, he's been rather quiet. Nobody really knows where he is, but he has actually handed over the reins in terms of the operations to his sons. So he named 3 CEOs, one for the gaming, one for the finance, and one for the non-gaming side of Naga World. But you know, anybody's guess, and I'm sure the papers probably have more information on that than I do.
Okay. One last open question to both of you on that last issue. Based on your understanding, the capabilities of his 3 sons, are we looking at 3 capable princes, or have we got a King Lear situation emerging?
No.
No comment?
No. This is the answer to your question.
Okay. So, to Thailand. Now, I'm aware that the session after this one, 2 sessions after this one, is going to be looking at Thailand in some detail. So we don't want to tread on those toes too much, but because it is part of Indochina and because it is related to the ongoing situation in Cambodia in terms of potential competition, I'd just like to get your thoughts, gentlemen, on speculation on if we do get a legalized regulated gaming industry. How big will the market be in terms of revenue? How many IRs will open? Where will they open? And who will their target markets be? Ben?
The Thai market is the elephant in the room. It will compete against all other jurisdictions in Asia, without a doubt. Even without gaming, they do about 40 million visitors. The tourism market is huge, it's ginormous. All this talk about 3 legal IRs being looked at initially, etc., etc. There's a lot of hype surrounding it, just like there was in Japan 12 years ago, and we still haven't seen it come to fruition. But Thailand, if it happens, and it's likely to happen, will happen very, very quickly. The only issue with Thailand is that in all likelihood, I mean, look, he's been approached by people wanting to get operators in. I've been approached by local parties wanting to get involved. And we're just 2 individuals. I'm sure there are dozens of landowners out there, developers, wannabe casino operators, looking to get involved in gaming. And as I mentioned earlier, all the casinos that are right on the border with Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, they are all owned by people with significant influence and connections in Thailand. And that's not to mention the underground casinos in Bangkok. They're owned by the army and the police. You put that all into perspective. If casinos happen in Thailand, it would not be just 3. It would be what the marijuana industry has developed into. A free-for-all, a weed shop at your street corner. Everybody with vested interest will be able to get a license. And the Thai market is huge. It will actually be able to accommodate. I would say easily, forget your 3, I would easily say at least 6, if not up to 10.
What you're suggesting here is that Thai legislators are going to fold to pressures well outside the chamber. Is that what you foresee?
What sort of pressure, sorry?
Well, pressure from those various interests.
Well, if you look at the current administration, the current regime is run by the military junta. And as I said, the underground casinos, they are very well involved in the underground operations. And if Thaksin's daughter gets in, he has a lot of supporters who own casinos right around the border. They're not going to support him unless he is a quid pro quo. Simple as that.
Daniel, any comments on that situation?
No, I totally agree with Ben. I think the impact that having a jurisdiction in Thailand will really shake up the entire market, especially now that when you look at Macau, you can't have junket operations there. You'll have full-blown junket operations in Thailand. Thailand itself doesn't really need to rely on the casinos, but I think the likes of Singapore, the likes of definitely Cambodia, smaller regions, will have something to worry about if Thailand gets licensed to go.
Okay, we have to move on to Vietnam.
So very, very quickly,
go ahead.
10 years ago when we spoke about this, the previous king was very much against gambling. It never happened. And when he passed away, I said that, look, give it another at least 5 years. It will happen. And I think we're about the 5-year mark.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, because even today I think some sell-side analysts are still a bit negative maybe a little bit jaded on the prospect of a full-on global engagement with the Thai gambling market, with IRs and so on. Again, perhaps emulating what happened in Japan and earlier on in South Korea. But there seems to be more positive signs coming from that commentary as well.
The current king is not against it. That's the most important thing.
Okay, let's move to Vietnam. And Ben, first of all, could you just give us a quick rundown about what the status is with junkets in Vietnam and what role they play and whether they're as influential as they used to be?
There didn't used to be many junkets. There was one junket only at Ho Tram. Then there were about 10 junkets involving Crown, which was by far the largest junket property. And Crown is in Da Nang, not too far from Hoi An. It was purely a junket destination. And then you've got various little casinos all around Bắc Ninh province up to Ha Long Bay and Hai Phong and so forth and so forth. But they were very, very small properties, very badly run. They were involved in phone betting, they were involved in online, but they always had a junket. And then you had the casinos across the border with China, which Donaco owned one. So there were probably, I think, when we did a feasibility study there last time, it was probably around 8 proper casinos in Vietnam, and that's before Corona and Phu Quoc. Now, as Gillian mentioned, you've got Ho Tram, you've got Hoi An, you've got Phu Quoc. Corona is struggling. Ho Tram is starting to do good. We did a management review and marketing audit there about 3 years ago, and we recommended some directions, and it looks like they've picked up on that. Hoi An was originally going to be junket driven. We did the feasibility study for that. We did the original area of macro programming. But with what's happened to one of its consortium partners, Sun City, obviously the junket driven model is no longer there. It was going to be flipped. But having said that, it's going to be very hard to have a huge IR like that that's going to be mass driven, particularly when you don't have access to the local market. So looking in from the outside, they have to start focusing on 2 areas. One is the Southeast Asian junket, which Naga holds, and they could probably have significant traction into that Southeast Asian junket market, and Daniel and I are very familiar with that market. The other one that's more interesting is because junkets no longer have a viable business model in Macau. Having said that, they are looking to get in Macau because the junket agents, they said, look, last 3 years, I haven't got anything. 1.25% flat commission, I'll still do it. But they go in there, they try it, and they find out that their margins are absolutely skinny, and it's not worthwhile. And right now, they're disguising themselves as house program players, but with their friends, and their friends are the players, but they all play with that house commission player name. So it's hiding the junket business under another name, something that they've done in Singapore for a long, long time. So they're doing it, but the returns are not there in Macau. So they are looking at alternative destination. Philippines, despite its 47.5% to 52.5% revenue sharing model, is not gaining any traction. Hoi An, it's going to be an interesting one. They've got a huge junket party this weekend. And they've got a lot of guests invited, a lot of junket agents are going. In fact, quite a few of the casinos on international marketing people are attending this event. So it's going to be interesting, and it's too soon to tell to see whether they can divert the business that would have gone to Macau to Vietnam. And it's going to be interesting to see if China will actually control the exit visas to Vietnam. I suspect not. As we said in our feasibility study, China views Vietnam as a tier 2 country that they need to build closer relationship with to try and move them away from the US, and they're prepared to use soft power, i.e. this, which they did with Philippines, and then it got flipped around. But they're still doing it with Vietnam. And Vietnam, we know the GGR was very, very small. So even if the GGR grows exponentially, it is still small biscuits. So I think China will be prepared to allow, and they recently just announced that they're allowing group tours to resume to Vietnam, right? So it will be interesting to see how much business they allow Vietnam to have. But before Thailand, I would say Vietnam is a potential growth market. And there are, apart from the existing resorts and casinos, I am aware of plans for at least 2, if not 3 more IRs, of which at least 2 will also should also get local licenses.
That would suggest that the relationship between the land-based industry and the Vietnamese government has improved to the point where we're not getting the mixed messaging that we did for so long. Is that safe to say?
Sorry,
the relationship between the industry and the government.
We wrote a white paper on the gaming industry for the Vietnamese MOF back in, I think it was 2012, just before they released the decree in 2013. And around half of our recommendations were adopted, which was local gaming, levy, income tax, and to reduce the minimum investment from $4 billion down. Right now, the minimum investment is $2 billion, and for every $10 million you invest, you get more tables, you get more slots. So they adopted those key recommendations for us. And that was key to freeing up the industry to more foreign investment. And as long as they keep that flexible attitude, we should see growth of the industry driven primarily by the local developers who are prepared to invest in rural provinces.
Okay, Daniel, any final comments on Vietnam?
Yeah, I just want to add that, Vietnam is going through an evolution. And we've seen this happen in China. When they get their act right, they move extremely fast. Now, look at the development, the infrastructure development, as well as the economy of Vietnam with 100 million population. It will make sense that once and should Thailand have a gaming jurisdiction, they will make changes to how they play out the gaming legislation in Vietnam. But Vietnam, no doubt, is the next sleeping dragon.
Would you say that if the Vietnamese government do precipitate that quick change, will the impact on Cambodia be less or the same or greater than the impact of Thai reform on Cambodia?
That's a good question. Well, it's first and foremost, I think if they do implement changes, it'll be the next 3 to 5 years. So it'll be quite rapid. The change for Thai's impact to Cambodia will be a lot quicker for us to see and realize. I'm a believer that Thailand will have a license in the next 2 years. And I'm also a believer that when Vietnam gets their act together, they will be a dominant force in the market. They may not attract as many foreign tourism, but again, they are large in their own domestic population. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, we've talked a lot about the 3 main nations that we're covering. I just want to quickly look at Laos. Unfortunately, Kelly Gass, who is going to be at our final panel today, has not been able to make it, unfortunately, and she would have been able to talk about that perhaps later on. So sadly, we don't have that source of expertise to call on. But Ben, can I just quickly ask you about the prospects of the Laotian market, how it's progressed recently, and whether there's anything in the near future that might be worth talking about?
We did a feasibility study on Vientiane some years ago, and we studied what is that mountain resort in Vientiane, and we also studied Savan Vegas and King's Roman, the infamous China-run one. The Laotian market depended on 2 sources, i.e. the ones in Vientiane and Savan Vegas basically relied on the Thai market. King's Roman, the Chinese
but also blacklisted by the United States, so it's a no-go for most.
And they were recently, sold their management rights to a new Malaysian boss who wanted us to go and help them set up their due diligence process to help whitewash the casino. We politely declined. So with Laotian, now the new rail, one of the things that we looked at for that project in the Dong Fosi Special Economic Zone was that it was going to have the station for the fast rail all the way from China. The problem with Laos is very much politics bound. There was a casino operator right in no man's land between Thailand and Laos. That's controlled by a guy who was very, very close to the government. And as long as he can block the Thai off before they even come across the border into Laos, that project was not viable. And there were 2 or 3 other projects all centered around Vientiane. Savan Vegas, as I said, and that was one that Kelly was involved in. that's aimed primarily at the Thai community right across the border.
All right, well, just very quickly on Myanmar, it's almost reluctant to talk about it in a way because of the horrific things going on there and that have been going on for a while and are probably going to continue for some time. Nonetheless, there are casinos that are still operational. Prior to the beginning of the Civil War, there were a number of casinos in militia-held areas, as well as some dotted about other places, including at least one controlled by the military. What we have now is a situation where the militias on the eastern flank of Myanmar often are ethnic Chinese-owned and are also now associated with perhaps certain online operations. Are we going to see any kind of mainstreaming of those operations, or are these guys going to remain in the ether, so to speak, as far as the region is concerned?
I actually went into Myanmar a couple of times, and I've got a very, very good friend whose family owns a few casinos, Thai-facing. So basically with Myanmar, you've got Thai-facing, you've got China-facing. The China-facing one in Mong Ha, basically they're run by cowboys. There are like 20, 30 establishments ranging from little shacks to pretty grand. And whenever China gets tired of them, they just shut the border.
Yeah, it's like the North Korean border casino. You just can't rely on it.
Yeah. During COVID, they were all shut down. But late last year, they were allowed to open up again, and they've only just recently started getting to their strides. They were trying to get into the online gaming industry as well. So a lot of Chinese operators were approaching those casinos to try and set up online video streaming in their properties. But as of right now, the Thai-facing ones are open. I'm not sure about the China-facing ones.
All right, from an operator's point of view, Dennis, when you look at Myanmar, what do you say? What do you think? Any hope for that place in the near future?
Well, Myanmar has still many years to go. I mean, infrastructure-wise, they're not quite there. This situation politically will take a while before it clears up. And, it'll still be a force in the region, but I think they have bigger problems to worry about for the time being. So we've not placed too much focus into Myanmar, so it's not something that I can really comment too much on.
Okay. And by the way, the licenses are not issued by the central authorities. They're actually issued by the army.
Okay. We've got about 2 minutes to go, according to this warning down here. So I'm going to skip over a question I was going to ask about the variable impact of Chinese government threats to its own citizens when they gamble or work overseas, because I think we've already seen enough evidence of what happens and how that differs from place to place. And you said already, Ben, in terms of the impact on Cambodia or Vietnam, sometimes geopolitical issues can have a real role to play in what Beijing decides when they wanted to communicate with another government. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you. Please join me in thanking Daniel and Ben.
Thank you.